On March 16, 1990, Jerry Walters was watching TV when he got a disturbing phone call.
"Are you Regina's father?"
the caller asked.
"I know where to find her. She's in the loft of a barn. I made some changes. I cut her hair."
When Jerry asked if his daughter was alive, the caller hung up. By the age of 14, Regina Key Walters had already had a history of running away from home. Her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother, Carolyn Simpson Walters, in Pasadena, Texas. Carolyn worked long hours to support them while trying to wrangle the rebellious teen. One night, they had a huge fight over Regina's wish to visit her friend. It was 9:30 p.m. after all. So, when the next day Regina went missing, Carolyn was not awfully alarmed. It had happened before. But days passed, and Carolyn got worried. As a rule, when Regina ran away, she'd call her mum to tell her everything was okay and she'd be back when she was ready. This time, it was different. The girl just vanished. The Pasadena police found out Regina was dating Ricky Lee Jones, 4 years her senior. The couple believed they were in love, but who'd approve of their relationship? Regina was underage, while Ricky had brushed with the law before. He was on probation for theft and now was facing the charge of contributing to the delinquency of a minor.
When they saw the flyers that the mother had left out with reward on her location, they decided it would be best to leave the area so they wouldn't be caught. And that's when they decided to leave the area, hitchhike to Mexico.
Ricky had relatives just across the border. The couple thought they'd hitch a ride together, escaping the law. What could be more romantic? But the man they met on dusty roads wouldn't share their dream. Not only that, he had his own plans for the two. Just days before, a bruised and desperate teen with a padlocked dog chain around her neck was spotted on a Houston highway. She told the police that her name was Shana Holts, that she was 18 and had been living on the streets since she was 12. 2 weeks earlier, a trucker picked her up at a truck stop. The Good Samaritan chained her up in his sleeper cab and subjected her to extreme sexual torture, involving various sex toys, sticks, and fishhooks. Treating the girl like a toy, he also cut her hair short and shaved her private parts. On the day of Shana's escape, the man brought her home and allowed her to shower. Then he pulled up to a Houston brewery to pick up a load. "Sit there and be a good girl," the trucker told Shana before hopping down and slamming the door shut. Believing Shana was harassed into complete submission, the kidnapper didn't even care to chain her or lock the cab. Using Shana's description, the police quickly detained the driver. But Shana dropped her gaze and said it wasn't the man. Only later, she confessed she was simply too terrified of her abductor. "I don't see any good in filing charges. It's just going to be my word against his. If there was any evidence, I would file. I would file charges and sue him." In reality, the evidence was plentiful, but the only thought pulsing in the teen's brain was that she was a homeless nobody whose word meant nothing against that of a working member of society. If she pressed charges and the abductor came after her, who'd be there to protect her? The trucker was off the hook and on the road again. Interrupted in his game, he was craving another pet. When Regina and Ricky happened on his path, he knew he found a substitute for Shana. The trucker quickly killed Ricky, and Regina found herself shackled and gagged in the sleeper cab. It's impossible to imagine what torture Regina was subjected to. What part of it was more severe, physical or psychological? The driver went through her things and found her notepad that contained a lot of personal information, including her parents' phone numbers. The trucker enjoyed himself using the blank pages for his own notes. The most disturbing one was this graffiti-like message: "Ricky is a dead man." Just like with Holts, the abductor clipped Regina's hair short and shaved her body. Especially chilling is the level of self-assuredness the abductor possessed and how skillful he was in harassing his victims into submission. Sometimes, he let Regina out of the cab. A witness told the investigators that they saw Regina standing beside the truck, all thin and frail. At one point, she mouthed, "Help me," to a passerby, but nobody cared enough to get their hands dirty with something weird or potentially dangerous. For all they knew, it could be a bad prank, or the kid could simply be a drug addict. Regina was as good as invisible. In the early hours of April 1st, 1990, Trooper Mike Miller of the Arizona Highway Patrol was going home when he noticed a tractor trailer parked on the side of an interstate on-ramp. The lights were on, but the place was not fit for parking, and the warning triangles weren't out. As Miller approached the cabin, he heard a commotion in the sleeper. He stepped on the razor and shined his flashlight inside the cab. He saw a handcuffed nude woman with a horse bit in her mouth. The woman screamed, and a man burst out of the sleeper compartment and onto the road.
"What's going on?" And he said, "Nothing, officer, we're doing just fine. I've got a gun in my back pocket." And he motioned to his back pocket and then put his hands up on the side of his truck.
The trucker called it a consenting situation, but Miller decided to look into the matter a bit closer. He handcuffed the driver's hands behind his back and put him in the back seat of his patrol car, fastening a seatbelt around him for good measure. The woman in the cab was in bad shape, covered with cuts and welts, crying and screaming. Trooper Miller covered her nudity and assured her that help was on its way. When Miller returned to his car, he was surprised to see that the trucker had been busy. The man brought his handcuffed hands in front of him, unfastened the seatbelt, and was about to open the door. Miller promptly recuffed him.
There is no actual routine stop out there in the road that no matter what you come across out there, you never know who you're dealing with. And it kind of sent a chill up my spine to know that if this man, as cool as he was, could have probably killed me and the girl at the same time and still been on the road.
The rescued girl was identified as Kathleen Vine, 27. She told Detective Rick Barnhart that the trucker had picked her up earlier that day at Rip Griffin's truck stop north of Phoenix. Once she fell asleep, the abductor chained her and tortured her on and off before Trooper Miller came into the picture. He told her his name was Whip and Chains and that he'd been doing this for 15 years. The trucker was one Robert Ben Rhoades of Houston, Texas. When he was brought in for interrogation at 3 a.m., he dragged on his cigarette, stretched, and proceeded to tell the policeman that the woman in his cab was a nutcase and a mere lot lizard, which was trucker slang for prostitute. He said he had no time or desire to fool around on the road, and you didn't mess with lot lizards if you didn't want your dick to fall off. When the officers left Rhoades alone, he winced and patted his side that sported a fresh bite. However, Kathleen was far from a perfect witness. The woman readily talked about her kidnapping, but she had another story to tell.
Periodically, she would revert back to a story about her traveling across the country to see the president. She told me she wanted to give the president a microchip, and she talked about the underground prison where no one escapes from.
Still, the evidence was plentiful to charge Rhoades with aggravated assault, sexual assault, and unlawful imprisonment. What nagged on Detective Barnhart's mind was two things. One was Rhoades' rape kit, which was both very extensive and well organized. A clear indicator that Rhoades was doing this on a regular basis. Another one was the 15 years Rhoades had mentioned to Kathleen. When Detective Barnhart called the Houston Police Department, he learned of a very similar case that happened in Houston not a month ago. It all seemed too much for a Casa Grande detective to handle, so Barnhart got in touch with the FBI. Special Agent Bob Lee was similarly impressed with the rape kit. Sexual sadists start off with a limited rape kit, as we call it. Because his was so refined, we knew he'd been doing this for a long time. On April 6, with a search warrant in hand, the FBI agents entered Rhoades' apartment. They saw women's underwear strewn around, BDSM paraphernalia, and white towels, one of which was soaked with blood. Both Kathleen Vine and Shana Holts revealed that Rhoades used to place the towels beneath them before proceeding to torment them sexually. Among the other items found, there were photographs, many of a nude young girl, handcuffed and chained. Even a Carlos Santana poster on the wall looked inappropriately sinister in the apartment. The photos bothered Agent Lee. The teenager looked scared, and judging by the body hair in various stages of regrowth, by the old bruises, it seemed like Rhoades had kept her for a long time. Agent Lee could not broadcast her photos because she might have been a willing BDSM partner with Rhoades. It would mean violating her rights. It was only by chance that Agent Lee heard Mark Young, a fellow agent, discussing a case of a body found in a loft of a barn in Bond County, Illinois. It was discovered in September 1990 by a farmer inspecting the barn before demolition. The body was badly decomposed and identifiable only through dental records. It was Regina Key Walters. She'd been brutally garroted with a baling wire. When Special Agents Lee and Young looked into the case together, the only suspect had been Regina's boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones. But Lee didn't think it was true.
If Ricky Lee Jones had murdered Regina, he would have done it in a fit of anger, and that would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene. You got the impression that this is an older person, a white male, a traveler.
Forensic experts also found out that the victim's private parts were shaved shortly before her death. The agents recognized the signature. Lee and Young rushed to look at the evidence found in Rhoades' truck. To their shock, the police were about to destroy the collected evidence, and Rhoades himself was to begin a work furlough program soon. The agents made it just in time. Rhoades was charged with murder. To the very last, the trucker was grasping at the smallest possibility to get a better sentence. He entered a guilty plea to avoid the death penalty. When in prison, he tried twisting everything around, claiming he was tricked into confession, that he was betrayed by both the court and his own lawyers, all the while giving out no details about his crime and showing no remorse. Ricky Lee Jones' body, found back in 1991, was only identified in 2008. In 2003, the investigators linked the death of one more couple, executed similarly to Jones and Walters, to Rhoades' case. They were Patricia Candace Walsh and her husband, Douglas Iskowski, who went missing in January 1990. They were going to preach the Christian gospel in Utah, an intent as romantic as that of Walters and Jones. Rhoades is believed to be responsible for over 50 dead bodies strewn along the interstate highways of his travels. There's no definitive answer to Rhoades' motif. Deborah Davis, Rhoades' third wife, suffered from his abusive behavior. According to her, Rhoades had a very powerful sex drive, and his demands kept growing. Using different manipulative approaches, Rhoades eventually succeeded in forcing Davis into BDSM practices and swinging. It is believed that sexual sadists like Rhoades subject their close ones to torture and then play it out to the extreme with strangers. It's worth mentioning that Rhoades had a normal childhood. Problems started piling up as he was getting older. At 16, he was arrested for tampering with a car. The next year, another arrest followed, this time for a public fight. When Rhoades was 18, his father was charged with molesting a 12-year-old girl. While awaiting trial, he committed suicide. It is speculated that Rhoades himself could have been his father's victim or witnessed something horrible. Trying to compensate for his father's disgrace, Rhoades entered the Marine Corps but was dishonorably discharged for involvement in a robbery. Eventually, he became a long-haul trucker, driving a torture chamber on wheels. It is speculated that Rhoades was following in his father's footsteps. The short haircuts he gave his victims were to make them look like his young, abused self, but now it was Robert Ben who was in control. If Rhoades didn't lie to Holts about the 15 years and having killed before, how did he escape capture for so long? After all, Special Agent Young believes he could have been killing as many as 3 females a month. The answer is both simple and gut-wrenching. Deborah Davis remembers one eerie episode that took place at a truck stop. She saw a girl with a baby outside the restaurant. The teenager was trying to catch a ride and looked desperate. Deborah hesitated, thinking of the best way to help the girl, when her husband came up from behind, grabbed her shoulders, and whispered in her ear, "You see that, Debbie? She's one of the invisible people."